Well, there you go. That's them. I'm not going to clickbait this. You won't even have to pause the video because I'll keep them up there for a minute. These are the games that, as determined by the website steam250.com, have the worst ratio of disliked to liked reviews, along with a little bit of math. What's most interesting to me, however, is that every single one of these drew the ire of the PC master race for completely different reasons. And even the stories I thought I knew were actually only a fraction of the real issue. Take, for example, Roller Coaster Tycoon World, currently sitting at spot number 10 on the list with a 75% negative rating. Roller Coaster Tycoon World is the tragic tale of a publisher desperate to milk a franchise long after the man who made it special had moved on. Saying the words Roller Coaster Tycoon is like casting a spell that sends a 2000s kid back in time to when computer monitors had ears and could kill a man when dropped from a second-story balcony.
Roller Coaster Tycoon was from that golden age of simulation games, where you could slap the word sim on the front of anything and it was an instant hit.
SimCity, Sim Tower, Sim On. This list isn't actually as long as I thought it would be.
Of course, your other option was to slap Tycoon on the end of a word. And out of all of these, Roller Coaster Tycoon reigned supreme. The first RCT game was developed entirely in assembly by just one man, legendary programmer Chris Sawyer. The upside to a language like assembly is that programs such as, say, a roller coaster management simulator will run exceptionally well on even the shittiest family PC, no matter how many cool Internet Explorer search bars you install. That accessibility, along with the game being bundled in frozen pizza boxes, scholastic book fairs, and, just being a fun game, saw it explode in popularity. Chris and his team of artists Simon Foster and composer Alistair Brimble would go on to create Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, the game which Chris says fulfilled his personal vision for Roller Coaster Tycoon. You see, Chris reads like a true artist to me, one that isn't content to endlessly milk easy sequels for money, but one that moves on when he feels he's done all he can do with a concept.
Although earning $30 million does give you the flexibility to do things like that. Of course, just because the auteur involved with a franchise is finished with it, doesn't mean the ravenous capitalistic conglomerate who publishes it is. And here's where the milk from our cash cow starts to turn sour. Ugh!
The development of Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 was passed off to Frontier Development. And while it hasn't aged as well as 2, it was and is still a well-received game. Chris Sawyer would act as a consultant for 3, which was the last time he would be involved with any future release in the series.
Following Chris's departure, the series took a steep dive, like a roller coaster.
8 years after Roller Coaster Tycoon 3, a 3DS game titled Roller Coaster Tycoon 3D was released, which is neither the third game in the series nor the first 3D Roller Coaster Tycoon game.
Though I suppose Super Mario 64 isn't the 64th one either. Roller Coaster Tycoon 3D was hot ass, but it wasn't nearly as poorly received as the next game. Roller Coaster Tycoon 4. Mobile.
Yes, the fourth official Roller Coaster Tycoon game was a direct-to-mobile game from that particularly awful era of mobile gaming where companies with big IPs realized you could just print money from making lazy, microtransaction-riddled slop like The Simpsons Tapped Out or Family Guy The Quest for Stuff. Sure guys, act all irreverent and satirical all you want, you're still a 2014 freemium game.
It should be noted that Chris Sawyer absolutely despises microtransactions in mobile games.
I have a personal disgust for any game which deliberately tries to hook players into feeling they have to pay something extra to continue playing or to take shortcuts, but it's a proven and successful income model.
For some reason, people don't like to see their childhood nostalgia coated in piss and then wrung out on their doorstep. So to placate the gamers who are hoping for, an actual game, publisher Atari announced a new PC game as well. Roller Coaster Tycoon World. This would end up being worse than, just doing nothing, honestly.
The announcement trailer received less than favourable impressions from both fans and gaming media alike. These ranged from tactful, such as Roller Coaster Tycoon World's gameplay trailer is tragically bad, to possibly the funniest title I've ever seen for a news article. Now, this has to be one of the worst trailers I've seen for a game. It opens with real footage from a real roller coaster, which baits you into thinking maybe this is a cinematic trailer, or better yet, these are in-game graphics. But after some very dodgy motion-tracked text, it awkwardly transitions into actual gameplay so bluntly that the janitors will be sawdusting your vomit in no time. Here we're finally treated to the real graphics, and it's not good. It's ugly, in fact. The colors are ass, the lighting sucks, half of the shots have shadows and the other half don't, as though they were trying to show off what this game would look like with the settings turned to low, in case you're wondering. I know this was almost 10 years ago at this point, but that doesn't mean shit. The Witcher 3, Bloodborne, Arkham Knight, all 2015 games, all still looking great today. Sure, these were all different genres with larger budgets, so a fairer comparison might be Cities Skylines, which dropped a few days after this trailer and looks infinitely better, despite having to render an entire city and not just a single theme park. The trailer also has that shitty, cherry, hipster Kickstarter music that was endemic at the time. This isn't surprising because despite being published by Atari, it feels like the sort of Kickstarter game that would play off nostalgia to deliver a half-baked early access mess that captures none of the spirit of the original. Atari swapped developers partway through development for reasons they've never disclosed, then swapped developers a second time for more reasons they've never disclosed, which is always a good sign. These 9 circles of development hell pushed the game's release from early 2015 to December of 2015.
After a beta weekend in October of 2015, the feedback, which I can't imagine was good, prompted them to delay the game a second time until early 2016. In March of 2016, the game slopped out into early access, which was the 2010s way of saying, we've already spent too much bloody money on this thing, but we can't afford to delay it anymore. Along with a dash of, you can't critique it yet because it's not done.
After being universally mocked for several months, Atari announced that it would officially leave early access on November 16th, 2016. One day before the release of rival park management sim, Planet Coaster, which was, a good game. Like an exiled prince coming to dethrone their tyrannical father, Planet Coaster was also developed by the exact same company that made Roller Coaster Tycoon 3.
So, the trailer was bad, but that thing came out 2 years before the game was even released. And early access is essentially like the game's beta, so maybe the final release ended up being half decent. Let's take a look at those reviews.
Bad simulation, bad frame rate, bad graphics, bad communication from the developer, poor future plans, poor bug fixes, poor coding, poor attempt at pleasing everyone, poor attempt at keeping what an RCT game even is, poor game life it's had due to having 3 separate developers. Well, they don't mention the music at least, so maybe that's okay. The game only has 1 song and 6 variations, which are not that great either. Okay, never mind.
The reason I included all that preamble about Roller Coaster Tycoon's history is because it's important to realize just how much Atari botched this beloved franchise. A franchise encased in rock-hard nostalgia, like a mosquito encased in amber.
Don't forget, Chris Sawyer programmed 2 vastly superior versions of this game out of glue and spaghetti sauce by himself, with only a talented artist and composer to help with visuals and audio. Which is quite a lot, actually. Almost every review in some way or another says you should just buy Planet Coaster instead.
I don't know if Atari was hoping to edge out Planet Coaster by just releasing a day earlier, as though the audience was so ravenous for a theme park simulator that they'd be willing to settle for a boring, ugly mess instead of waiting 1 day. Maybe they thought game development's like a race, and whoever gets their one out first is the winner.
Clearly they forgot the legendary quote from Shigeru Miyamoto, designer and director of 1982's Popeye. A bad Roller Coaster Tycoon game will be bad for a very long time. Maybe a year. But a good game, a Planet Coaster game, Roller Coaster Tycoon.
Many kudos. I want to play a game.
I knew I shouldn't have installed that television.
You indulge in life's cravings too often. Now you'll have to prove you can survive without them. If you can go 24 hours without a single bad habit, you can leave. Or you get a $50 gift card.
Nice try, But I've got a trick up my sleeve.
You have what?
I've got today's sponsor, Fume. Fume is a little breathable ear device, that really rolls off the tongue, that's designed to help you break your bad habits. Now, some people are able to just quit their bad habits cold turkey, but not everyone can. So what might work better is replacing them with a healthy alternative. Cranberries.
Cranberries.
Fume has no electronics, so no heating, which means no vapor. You're literally just breathing in flavored air, like if you sucked really, really hard over a piece of fruit. My personal favorite flavor is white cranberry, which I'm currently rocking, and every time I want to reach for a Sour Patch Kid, I reach for this instead, because otherwise my dentist sends me death threats. So, take that, Mr. Derek Sorman.
Please note that this is a pre-recorded message.
Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Fume also just launched the Base, which is a beautifully designed weighted stand you can rest your Fume on when it's not in use. Head to tryfume.com/minikudos or scan the QR code and use code minikudos to get 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. Thanks again to Fume for sponsoring this video.
Sport games aren't my cup of tea, but for a huge portion of the population, they does be.
These games, for many people, are as deep as they're willing to tip their basketball-shaped toes into the world of gaming. And there's nothing wrong with that, in theory. Unfortunately, the companies behind these games know that, and so not only do they have no incentive to make a better game, they actively design hostile, expensive grind fests that would put a Korean titty gacha to shame.
And those at least have some creamy rotundos for you to enjoy. Unless you mod LeBron, I suppose. Throw in the fact that Take-Two has had exclusivity deals with the NBA since as early as 2011, and you've essentially got a monopoly on an entire genre.
Imagine if World of Warcraft was the only game that was allowed to have elves and dwarves and magic, or Fortnite was the only game you're allowed to shoot a gun in, or Call of Duty was the only game you're allowed to be called a Sure, these examples are a bit more extreme than the reality. Take-Two doesn't own the rights to the game of basketball, but if you're an NBA fan, the 2K series is the only place you're able to play as the real players and the real teams that you actually give a shit about.
So when they release a buggy, broken mess of a game that's closer to a credit card scam than a piece of entertainment, your options are either play the game or play nothing. So what is it about 2K24 on Steam that's especially offensive?
The vast majority of it comes down to slighting the ego of the PC master race. In addition to the gameplay scruples we'll look at in a minute, the PC version of 2K is probably the worst PC version I've ever seen of a game.
Note that I didn't say port, because a port at least implies it's the same game.
The most glaring issue off the bat is that 2K24's Steam release is the last gen version of the game. It used to be that games would receive simultaneous release of both last gen and next gen around the time a new console generation came out to bridge that gap, before leaving last gen behind to wither. However, next gen console supply shortages have seen games like 2K receive simultaneous last gen and next gen versions well into the current generation's lifespan, and for some bizarre reason have decided that PC couldn't handle the raw power of the PS5 and Xbox Series versions.
Keep in mind that one of the key features of PC gaming is that you're able to achieve graphical quality leagues above what was available on console. So the game looks outdated, but it at least has all the same features as console, right? Yeah, about that. It'd probably be quicker to just list the few features the game actually has, but here's a list of everything that's missing. No My Career Story, no Pro Play animations, which is one of the major new features of 2K24, no City for My Career, no crossplay with consoles, can't select what jerseys you play, no accessories for away games, can't explore the locker room? On top of all this, the PC scene for 2K is dead. A lot of sports games fans lean on the casual side of the spectrum, and casual gamers aren't really known for dropping several $1,000s on a gaming PC when they can just buy a PS5 and be done with it.
So it's unsurprising that the PC version doesn't receive the same love as the console versions, which begs the question as to why they even bothered to release it at all. I mean, it's money. The answer's money, but humor me.
The PC version is also so easy to hack and pump your character's stats that you're practically forced to, as you'll be playing at a severe disadvantage against everyone who does.
Which is all of them, because the game's anti-cheat must just be a text file that says, Don't forget, add an anti-cheat before shipping.
So, if you're willing to look past your outdated, feature-stripped copy of a game that's community is 10 people who all cheat, you're greeted with a game that wants all your money.
If you want your My Career character to be even remotely viable, you have to drop real money on the game to buy the in-game currency, VC.
Okay, in fairness, you can earn VC by playing games, except that you earn a pathetic amount of it if you lose, which you will because your character needs more currency to level up. It's a perfectly designed hamster wheel that has only one clear way out of it: paying money. Or not playing it, but let's be real, that's not happening. Mobile Suit Gundam Battle Operation 2 is a game so exciting that they felt the need to have the title be in all caps. But for the sake of your ears, I'll read it as though it has none.
Mobile Suit Gundam Battle Operation 2 is a free-to-play gacha game based on the iconic Japanese anime franchise Gundam. It boasts a massive array of mobile suits available to earn, epic 6v6 multiplayer battles, and a gacha model that is supposedly very free-to-play friendly.
The game is, according to most reviewers, an incredibly fun multiplayer experience that's everything they've ever wanted from a Gundam game that they can't recommend to anyone. Out of all of the games on this list, this one is the most disappointing because it came so close to being good, but fell on its face at the last hurdle: being able to actually play the damn thing.
Games with network issues have been a recurring theme of the last few months, with overnight hits like Helldivers 2 and Last Epoch suffering from success. These games were so popular that it exceeded even their wildest estimations, and it wasn't long before all their server pipes were clogged up, and for their reviews to do the same. Mobile Suit Gundam Battle Operation 2 suffers from a similar, albeit much stupider problem. Its netcode is so bad that you'll frequently struggle to join a match, to the point that the words "failed matchmaking" will be burnt into your monitor.
The leading theory for this is that the game utilizes peer-to-peer servers, where there isn't one central server that the game is hosted on, and instead it's hosted on each of the players' computers. Many games utilize this system, but Battle Operation 2 has such strict requirements for player ping that anything less than the best is a felony and will result in you getting killed. I'm sure these latency requirements work great if, say, both players are on a small island in East Asia, but not so much when you've got two separate players on two separate time zones. This is frustrating on its own, but made roughly 900 billion times worse by the second awful design decision: a penalty system. Let me read you this review. Chad's going to read you this review.
Oh, sure. Disconnecting from a match once drops you from good standing to caution, and doing so again before getting back up. I ain't reading this shit. Can't read.
Disconnecting from a match once drops you from good standing to caution, and doing so again before getting back up to good will drop you to penalty level 1. This bans you from matchmaking for several days, stops you from getting most after-match rewards or XP, and makes it so you can only lose ranking points when playing ranked matches until you get back to at least caution. The only way to climb the standings and get back to good is by completing ranked matches. It will never go away on its own and take several dozen matches to get back up to good.
The Steam reviews page consists almost entirely of people recounting their experience of receiving bans ranging anywhere from 24 hours to a week, all for having the audacity to attempt matchmaking. 8 months after this game's release, the matchmaking woes continue to plague it. Spacebase DF-9, short for Spacebase Didn't Finish 9, is the perfect example of the early access failure. This one really hurts to cover, as Double Fine is one of my favourite developers, but come on guys, what the fuck is this?
Space Ghost was cooked up as part of Amnesia Fortnite 2012, a public game jam / fundraising event by Double Fine Productions and the folks from Humble Bundle. Anyone that pitched in $1 or more could cast their vote for their favourite prototype, with the top 5 being made into full games and given to everyone who paid.
Spacebase would receive the second highest number of votes, and would go on to be released a year later in October of 2013. In early access.
The game itself is a town management simulator like Banished or RimWorld, except set on a space station in space, because it would be weird if it was a space station in Detroit.
That's about how much effort I'm going to put into describing it, because Well, that's how much effort they put into making it. Let's talk about early access. Early access is a double-edged sword. But the problem with double-edged swords is there's no hilt, so there's nothing to hold on to, and you'll just end up hurting yourself.
Some very successful games have been made this way, from Subnautica to Hades to Baldur's Gate 3, and perhaps a little game you may have heard of called Minecraft. Yes, the cube-based Groomer is considered to be one of the first early access games by today's standards. Originally released as an alpha version, Notch sold access to the game for a discounted rate of $15, with backers receiving all future updates and the final version for free. Well, for $15. The funds from this allowed him to quit his job and focus development solely on Minecraft, and the rest is history.
So, what features does early access have that makes it more enticing for developers over, say, traditional releases?
Early access allows games to be tested as they're developed, which can help address glaring bugs or design issues early. On top of that, you can begin building a community before a game is even released, whose feedback can help shape the future of the game. By far and away, the biggest benefit is the ability to generate revenue while still developing the game without having to dip into your savings. Crowdfunding also means they aren't beholden to the whims of publishers who might demand changes to ensure a return on their investment. Double Fine in particular had an exceptionally negative experience with publishers back when developing Brutal Legend. Brutal Legend was dropped by its original publisher, Activision, when they merged with Blizzard, only for the game to get picked up by EA.
Which is like escaping Epstein's Island on a boat owned by Jared Fogle. Activision then tried to block EA from developing the game, citing the money that they'd already invested in its development. I can't imagine morale on the project was very high, knowing all of your hard work could just get tossed in a bin because some overpaid asshole in a suit threw a hissy fit. When Spacebase DF-9 released, Steam's early access was still in its infancy, only about a year old at this point. While the system comes with all the benefits mentioned before, it also has a few of its own drawbacks.
Like any crowdfunding campaign, the community can easily be led on. Any flaws in the game, big or small, are often overlooked since they'll fix it later, even if the developers have no intention to, which leads to the second problem. There's no obligation for anyone to actually finish an early access game. If the game doesn't do as well as they want, or they stub their toe on the way to their computer and decide they don't want to do it anymore, they can just stop.
If your purchase of the game lies outside of Steam's refund policy, then, well, sorry, you're just stuck with some broken, unfinished version of a game you paid money for, you big lemon.
You can probably guess what happened to Spacebase DF-9 then. After sales of the game didn't meet Double Fine's expectations, they could no longer afford to keep developing it, or they simply didn't have confidence in its marketability anymore, or they stubbed their toe on the way to their computer, etc, etc. The game was rushed out of early access, and despite being released, it is clearly far from finished. This wasn't helped by the official website containing a list of every idea they hoped to implement, giving backers an itemized list of what could have been.
They even uploaded the game's source code, as if to say, modders, please finish the game for us. Which they did. Not long after Spacebase's release, 12 employees, including project lead JP LeBreton, were laid off from Double Fine. So, some games are bad, some games are greedy, and some games are just too weird for their own good. This is one of those games.
Uriel's Chasm is described as a religious deprogramming tool, which I suppose is one way to stand out in a market that's primarily about stuff like adventures and excitement and fun.
If I was the angry video game nerd, here's where I'd say something like, oh, you want to deprogram, alright? Deprogram your TV so you don't have to look at this shitty game anymore.
Ulrich's Crevasse is the second game by indie game devaluer Dylan Barry. Dylan began making games after giving up on a floundering music career, but he was at least better at that than game development, as the best part of these games is the music. His game dev company is named Rail Slave Games, which, unless there's a reference I'm missing, is a really weird fucking thing to name your company.
Time to fire up the new game from Plantation Productions and Jim Crow Gaming, my favorite studios.
The game is very conceptual and reads more like an art project from someone with a passing interest in video games.
Which turns out is exactly what it is.
Dylan last played a few games in the 1980s, and then decades later saw an indie game, the movie. Modern development tools and resources allow indie game devs to make renowned, evocative games which can tell personal stories that directly reflect their creator. As a musician, Dylan became obsessed with this idea and said it was like writing games like songs.
But enough backstory. What actually is it? The whole thing can be finished in about 30 minutes, so for $7.50, you're not really getting a great deal when you could get, any of these instead. If it was a 30-minute non-stop thrill ride of insane gameplay and story, maybe it could be excused, but it's not.
The game is offensively retro, as these are the only real points of reference the designer has. Immediately, you're hit with a video clip of some British lassies who are doing a let's play of the very game you're playing. Now, it's possible that Dylan was channeling retro FMV video games like Phantasmagoria or Dragon's Lair, but it's also equally possible it was just easier than animating actual cutscenes. The actual game portion is a hodgepodge of retro arcade genres sloppily placed one after the other. It goes from a top-down shooter to a side-scrolling shooter in a feces dimension, to the sort of platformer Hitler would make in Game Maker Studio, to this fucking thing. You also collect trees, which are just crucified Jesuses, like you're playing a less subtle Slender Man in the 7 pages. The entire game is also interspersed with subtle religious symbolism, such as entire unskippable Bible verses which take up the entire screen.
Some of which repeat. If there's anything that's easy to quote, it's the Bible. Surely you could have found a couple more. If it wasn't obvious, Dylan is a born-again Christian, which is totally fine. I just, prefer if he kept that behind closed doors and away from children.
The game very proudly eschews normal game design conventions to produce something completely original. Another of Dylan's games was very generously compared to the introduction of punk music in the late 1970s. Now, the AAA games industry is infamously stagnant at times, as we've seen from other games in this very video.
Fresh blood coming into the industry with radical ideas has proven to be a successful formula in the past. But the problem with being an auteur is just because your ideas are original doesn't actually mean they're any good.
It turns out that some well-established conventions actually have good reasons behind them, like not having the camera of your platform section slowly rotate for no discernible reason. Understandably, most people aren't interested in pseudo-intellectual religious art pieces masquerading as video games, and the game has less than favourable reviews.
But what's the real issue here?
The graphics are weird and bordering on ugly, but there's at least some direction there. And games like Cruelty Squad prove that you can successfully lean into a garish aesthetic. Intentionally difficult, irritating games can also serve a greater narrative purpose, as games such as Lisa the Painful and Shrek Super Party prove.
This game doesn't utilize either. Unless I'm just some kind of smooth-brained individual who can't pick up on the deep, meaningful layers, the whole thing just feels like there's nothing to scratch under the surface. There's no non-verbal storytelling like Dark Souls or Meat and Fuck Kingdom. It's just biblical exposition with a veneer of profundity.
Like Baby's first art house piece. Just make it incoherent and squirt some biblical allegory over everything and call it a day.
Also, can you really act punk when you're promoting the most popular religion in the world? Now, you'd think something that has been universally panned by critics wouldn't find a wide audience. And you'd be right.
However, a lot of the negative reviews mention being gifted the game, which can only mean it's joined the proud list of cheap, shitty games you gift your mate on Steam as a joke.
For me and my mates, it's a game called Wet Girl. Oh look, it's on special. Would you believe this game's better rated than... It's Call of Duty.
With so many games on this list being unfinished, greed-filled money shredders, it's refreshing to have another game that's just bad.
Flatout 3 is the sequel to Flatout 1 and 2. But wait, there's more.
The first two Flatout games are considered standouts in the genre of driving car fast, cargo crash, crash car fast, fast crash, cargo fast, cargo crash. Flatout 2, in particular, is considered to be one of the best racing games on the PS2.
So, what the hell happened? Imagine you had a guy named Euthanasia Steve Pets at your dog, and then was surprised when you came home to find that he'd killed your dog with a hammer. that's what happened with Flatout.
The original developer of the series, Finland-based Bugbear Entertainment, were preoccupied with making the next Ridge Racer title, Ridge Racer Unbounded. Not wanting to let the hot Flatout IP go cold, publisher Strategy First showed their advanced strategic plays by giving it to Team 6, a company that makes dogshit shovelware games destined for the Walmart bargain bin in hell and the fucking squash equivalent of 2K. Up until quite recently, Flatout 3 held the #1 spot on this list, and you can still see it pop up when you look up videos on the worst games on Steam. It's one of those special games that takes a literal straightforward concept, as in going straight forward, very fast, and somehow fucks it up. The cars handle like dog shit, to where it's indistinguishable between a normal level and a level that has purposefully bad handling due to rain. The damage system sees cars bounce back after being T-boned as though caressed by a gentle autumn breeze, while lightly trading paint sees your car converted into a flaming wreck launched at an 8-year-old street racing fan watching on the sidelines. Your cars have no weight, the AI is about as smart as an Elon Musk fan, and to top it off, the game looks and sounds worse than the games that came before it.
The game was so bad that it killed all hype that the series had. Strategy First then had Team 6 make a mobile game called Flatout Stuntman, which is like getting Euthanasia Steve to look after your cat after he's already killed your dog. Bugbear Entertainment would later attempt to use Kickstarter to fund a spiritual successor to Flatout, but tragically only managed to raise $81,000, significantly less than what this next game swindled. This whole genre could practically be its own video, and in fact was the original concept for this video. The Do Anything MMO was one of the hottest crowdfunding genres of the 2010s, but unlike pretty much every other fad, I can't think of any that actually succeeded.
Even to this day, there's an itch for the roleplay heavy life sim that is really only being serviced by the likes of Gary's Mod and GTA 5 roleplay servers, or if you're a 300-pound woman in your 50s, Second Life. MMOs are famously expensive and hard to develop, so it's unsurprising many don't make it to release, even those made by large companies with veteran teams. That certainly doesn't stop some optimistic developers from making grandiose claims on Kickstarter, and even more optimistic backers donating $1 million to a project that probably wouldn't even work with 50. The irony of Identity is that, in spite of its name, it lacks anything of the sort, and instead swindled 187,000 Canadian dollars by making the same unfeasible claims as every other life sim game that people on Kickstarter feel weirdly obliged to give money to.
Perhaps they saw it as charity for the mentally unwell, which would technically make this tax deductible. The aptly named developer Asylum came groveling to Kickstarter asking for 150,000 Canadian dollars, which is far too little to create an MMO, but they do acknowledge that this is just to create a proof of concept that they can then sell to investors.
I'm sure, like anyone posting to Kickstarter, they were secretly hoping it would go mega viral and earn them millions, which sounds like isn't far from what happened.
If their website's to be believed, the funding from Kickstarter was only a fraction of the total earnings, with a whopping $1,450,010 raised from over 200,000 backers. So what is Identity, really?
Their Kickstarter pitch claims it's a modern-day open-world MMORPG for PC and Mac with complete freedom to do almost anything you can imagine at any time in first or third person. Live as an honest civilian, a criminal, police officer, paramedic, and many more. There are no levels or skill grinding, but talent and perk progression, so it's the actions of you, not your character, which matters most.
How you implement talents and perks without some kind of a level system is beyond me, but hey, I've never ran off with $1.5 million after failing to deliver a product, so what do I know?
The game offers a full player-driven world with its own player-driven economy that you can enjoy by participating in dozens of jobs and epic careers. Fuck yeah.
I can't wait to come home from my boring real job so I can keep leveling my tax accountant and Identity. Oh, wait, sorry. No leveling. Action and fun around every corner is probably the most fitting description of this entire product. Yes, there's a whole bunch of enjoyment and excitement, and it's just around that corner there. Now, you can't see or hear it, but it's there. The team experience portion just lists 2 other games that a guy named John worked on. No, they don't explain who John is or even mention a single other teammate. Because he was the only one. Just keep watching, man. I'll explain everything. While real-life activities can be fun given the right context in a game, the intrinsic mundanity of a life simulator makes it all the more hilarious when your key features are the sort of high-octane activities like owning a truck or being a landlord.
They do feature cops and robbers prominently as a selling point, which is a fairly popular genre of RP mods, so there's something there at least. Here's their trailer from January 2015. It opens with the generic Unreal Engine logo splash of a badass fantasy sequence that contrasts hilariously with the hard cut to a run-down house just straight shouting in the woods. Temporary placeholder art assets shown. Don't worry, the permanent placeholder art assets will be in the next trailer. For some reason, MapPad is a piece of concept art. Oh, and in case you forgot that this was a Canadian game.
Identity is all about
The trailer, and by extension the game, is just a bunch of random ideas that sound cool in theory, but to implement and enforce them would require the sort of back-end systems and design that a guy who did UI work for an MMO for 4 years probably isn't cut out to do. The trailer ends with the weirdest stinger. The first and only time another player is seen in the entire trailer, and it's a strangely friendly prisoner who asks if you're in a gang or need a shank.
Hey, you got a gang? You looking for one? You need a shank?
Like, damn, I wasn't sold until I saw the friendly shank seller. Now I gotta run out and donate to this Kickstarter immediately.
YouTube commenters, who I'm assuming didn't back the game and therefore didn't drink the Coke-flavoured Kool-Aid they supplied, were not very charitable. Accusations of it being a scam or simply unfeasible make up a majority of the comments. Also, sorry, this comment section has some of the dumbest comments I've ever seen in it. It's like everyone got hit in the head with a pan the second they went to go type. But let me just read a couple out for you.
There better be some planes. Will there be military bases and you can join the army and get trained like in the real army? The fun fact is that my gaming studio is making something like this, except much more things to do and more things to play with. Will there be ghillie suits? So, what is the Steam version? Is it the final cut? Well, no, it's a preview of what's to come. The Town Square is the first gameplay module released for Identity. This is not the full Identity game, but an early release component which allows you access to some social features. Purchase of Identity includes all modules, Town Square, SWAT, and Racing, upon completion, as well as the full retail game.
So, the game's early access, naturally, but given that so many people were quick to call this a scam, it probably wasn't the worst idea in the world to release some kind of demo to prove that, yes, work is being done, and no, we didn't just launder all that money through Genshin Impact. Where they fucked up was releasing this on Steam, not as some kind of free demo or heavily discounted early access title, but as a fully fledged game currently selling for $42.95 Australian. For comparison, Stardew Valley is 17.
This first module is named Town Square and is about as exciting as that title invokes. The next two modules, SWAT and Racing, sound much more like an actual video game, but for now you're stuck in the non-stop thrill ride that will have you edging in the seat of your pants as you dive into Town Square. The module itself is pretty much just a VR chat level with about the same amount of features, except that game is free and a dillion people play it, while this one is not. And not. You can customize a character, access player-owned housing if you've pledged to Identity's development, go to a cinema playing real movies, which I imagine will be a royalty-free bonanza, eat food, I guess, create artwork that can be placed in a gallery, plus additional content added regularly.
So that last one turned out to be a lie.
Released in late 2018, there were a few months of minor updates and hotfixes until June 17th, 2019, when the final update came out. And then, nothing. Following an update about the weapons system in May of 2019, the last time an official post would be made to their forums was August 14th, 2022.
This post here confirms that they really did just start out with one guy, the legendary John, and then grew to around 6 people after receiving funding. The team had been doing work for other gaming companies in order to pay the bills, so I guess that proof of concept never attracted any investors. Now, he does say to the community that they have donated enough and that he wouldn't feel comfortable asking for any more money until they prove that yes, they are actually working on something. Which is, nice when compared to something like Star Citizen.
In fact, I'll say right now that you shouldn't make purchases until we post more updates. Not because it'll be unrealized, but because after all these delays, it makes sense to me that we need to prove ourselves again. On that note, it is our plan that we will freeze sales of Identity on Steam in the near future until we make a release with enough substance to warrant its sale there.
As of time of writing, sales of Identity have not been frozen. Oh, hey Overwatch. Fancy seeing you here.
Now, if you want an in-depth look at why Overwatch 2 is so close to the bottom, my Overwatch Scandals video relays this in glorious gushing detail.
But to recap, Blizzard stopped releasing any substantial content for Overwatch 1 in order to focus development on Overwatch 2, essentially killing all hype and momentum that the game had.
After teasing some awesome PvE gameplay, which was the main selling point of the sequel, they would later say the mode was unfeasible and axed it.
Overwatch 2 was instead released as an update for the first game, which made it free to play.
Heroes are now locked behind paywalls. It has a battle pass system, a cosmetic shop with ridiculous pricing, and the PvE system that gobbled up all that dev time was now a couple of missions you could beat in a few hours that you had to pay extra for, and that they're never doing again.
On top of that, Blizzard has continually tarnished their reputation over the last 10 years by doing all this. What the fuck? The point is, fans have become increasingly frustrated at the company that, at one point, was considered the best in the business. So, when Blizzard released their games on Steam, a platform where people could finally let their voices be heard, a lot of them use it as a platform to let off a little bit of steam. When I first saw Overwatch 2 on this list, I thought, oh yeah, I've already done a whole video on that. I'm handsome and intelligent enough to remember what the issue was there. I was not.
Did you know that 2/3 of Overwatch 2's Steam reviews are actually in Chinese? In January of 2023, Blizzard ended their near 20-year partnership with Chinese technology company NetEase. Thanks to China's cool laws, Blizzard was forced to use NetEase to localize and distribute their games in China, including World of Warcraft, Hearthstone, and of course, Overwatch 2. That was until last year. The two sides have not reached a deal to renew the agreements that is consistent with Blizzard's operating principles and commitments to players and employees.
According to Kotaku, this was due to old bitch boy Bobby Kotick himself.
NetEase chief executive William Ding wanted their companies to switch to a licensing deal rather than a distribution-based partnership. While Bobby Kotick seemed open to the idea, he was concerned that a licensing deal would affect the regulatory talks surrounding the Microsoft acquisition. In response to these concerns, Ding told Kotick that NetEase could sway the Chinese government to either prevent or allow the Microsoft acquisition, which was being reviewed by Chinese regulators at the time. The Times claimed that Activision executives felt that NetEase had threatened Kotick.
I personally don't believe that anyone could be petty enough to cut out a market as massive as China's just because your fifis got hurt. That being said, after Bobby left Activision Blizzard to go ruin some other company back in January, all active lawsuits between NetEase and Blizzard were dropped. So, take from that what you will. Now, Chinese players can use the Steam version without having to use a VPN, and it does include Chinese localization. However, they're unable to access their old accounts with all of their skins and unlocks, and on top of that, are forced to play on servers hosted in other countries with poor latency. So imagine every issue you and I and every Blizzard fan has with the company, and then on top of that, you can't even play their games because some overpaid dickhead whose whole job is to make business deals can't figure out how to make a business deal. I was surprised that these Chinese gamers weren't able to knock Overwatch 2 down to the number 1 spot on the list. And then I saw what the number 1 was. Ah yes, it wouldn't be a list of video game achievements if there wasn't a Chinese game leagues ahead of their Western counterparts.
Take a look at any list of the highest grossing games that isn't scared to mention games outside of America, and they're regularly topped by mobile games and MMORPGs that gamers in China and the rest of Asia absolutely froth over. Of course, this isn't about a game succeeding. It's about one that ruined its legacy through sheer greed. and the commendable effort from Chinese gamers to not let any other game take the spot.
Between this and Overwatch 2, it's becoming apparent to me that the worst thing you can do when designing a game is to piss off the Chinese.
War of the Three Kingdoms is a Chinese online trading card game, not to be confused with War of Three Kingdoms, Battle of the Three Kingdoms, Three Kingdoms Legends of War, or Total War Three Kingdoms, the latter of which made researching this a real bitch as it gobbled up all the search engine results in English. It was originally a board game published in 2008 named Kingdom Wars, War of the Three Kingdoms, and at this point my eyes are just starting to glaze over the words on the script. The board game sounds like a mix of Among Us and Magic the Gathering, where players are tasked with teaming up with each other to either defend the player who's the lord, or assassinate them if they're secretly the rebels. This actually sounds fun as shit.
Given that I don't speak Chinese and barely speak England, it's impossible to nail down just how popular a 2008 board game was in a different country.
But it was certainly popular enough to be picked up and turned into an online card game circa 2009, by Yokoverse. It quickly rose in popularity, hitting 150,000 concurrent players in 2010 and 1 million concurrent players in 2013. They hosted their first esports event in 2016, which was the same year they released their Fighting Landlord mode, something I'm sure Mao would approve of.
So the game was fun and sucked people in and off for over 10 years. However, as we've seen on this list multiple times already, the worst games aren't the bad ones, they're the disappointing ones. After all, if your game just sucks, there won't be enough people playing it to give a shit. But ruining your game with a bad sequel, or a bad sequel, or a bad sequel, or a bad sequel, or a bad sequel is what really tips gamers over the edge.
From what I can glean from the Steam reviews, it was around the game's 10th anniversary that this TCG became microtransaction hell. I'm sure we've all seen stories like this dozens of times by now, where an old beloved franchise is suddenly set to milk by the powers that be. As previous versions of the game were hosted on their own private launch with no rating system, the Steam release was the first time their increasingly enraged fanbase were able to stick it to the developers and tell them how they really felt. Its place at the bottom of Steam appears to be for much the same reason as Overwatch, a game overdue of public critique finally released somewhere in the throwing range of Rotten Tomatoes.
On top of that, each version of War of the Three Kingdoms that gets released or ported doesn't let you play crossplay with other versions or migrate over all of your hard-earned cards or hard-bought cards from previous versions. So, a popular franchise turned to shit after everyone got invested because of greed. Big whoop. The difference is, this happened in China, and those Chinese motherfuckers are built.
It's quite rare to find any review with more than an hour or two of playtime, meaning most of these guys installed and ran the game just long enough to meet the minimum requirements to post a review on Steam.
This has clearly been a long time coming for some of them.
It also seems to be semi-coordinated, or at least became a bit of a meme in the community, to copy and paste the same phrase into negative reviews. I heard that if you give a negative review to Three Kingdoms Killer, your dear fellow killers will give you a thumbs up. I wonder if you generals can let me experience it. Some of the only positive reviews are from people who want Overwatch 2 to be number one, which is funny because War of the Three Kingdoms players do the exact same thing to other games that looked like they might take the coveted number one spot.
War of the Three Kingdoms has occasionally lost its title as the reigning champ to some of the other equally disappointing flops on this list, including Overwatch 2 and 2K24. But the sheer will of the Chinese gamer is not one to be trifled with. And while Western gamers are getting ready to pick sides in the hotly awaited sequel to Gamergate, the stoic Chinese gamers will continue their charge, piling more and more negative reviews on War of the Three Kingdoms, ensuring its reign for generations.
What up gamers, day before upload, Kudos here with a little channel/life update. This one's personal, so you can just call me James today if you want. Do you remember back around December and January when all these YouTubers came out saying that they were getting burnt out? Yeah, that was me too. Real quick, I expect zero sympathy, okay? I've got a dream job, I'm exceptionally lucky, and you who might have to work, open to close, it's some shitty retail job that you hate, I feel you. Okay, you have an actual job, but Unfortunately, I can't control my brain chemistry any more than you can, and the happy chemical was not occurring. I put a post up on Patreon that's public so anyone can view it, which goes into detail about the whole situation. Essentially what it came down to is I was consistently trying to put out a lot of content, and as a result had to cut corners like crazy, and I felt like the quality of the videos was far below what you deserve. And on top of that, I let one too many negative comments get to me in terms of not so much making me feel bad about myself or anything, but I'd see critiques about the videos and think, oh, this is what everyone thinks, so I'll cut out jokes and I'll have less weird stuff, and just kind of sanded off all the corners that made my early content weird and interesting to me, in order to appease this hypothetical viewer. So I'm not doing that anymore. I'm just doing stuff that I like, stuff that makes me laugh, and stuff that I used to do when I started. And I'm assuming you like that too if you're still sticking around. In order to get these videos at the level of quality and polish that I'm comfortable with, they will inevitably take a little bit longer to make. So unfortunately that might mean a little bit less content on this channel this year compared to last year. However, I have a solution. I have a second channel now. My second channel, Kudos, is my solution to being able to put out regular content for you guys to enjoy, bridge those gaps between longer uploads, and allow me to put more time and effort into this main channel video without feeling like I've just dipped off the internet for months at a time. The content's very much in the same vein as this channel, just a bit more casual and a bit shorter. There's a video out soon that's going to follow on from this video that looks at the games that were so bad that they were taken off Steam and therefore taken off the top 10 list on Steam250.com. So if that sounds interesting to you, click the link, suck my balls, and see you in the next one.